Hello and welcome back to Walk the Cinema podcast. Today's episode, we are going to be talking about Duck Soup.
This movie was recommended to us on our letterbox list a while ago. We finally got around to it. So thank you to the person that recommended it. I don't think we would have checked this out otherwise.
Yeah, this was not on my radar at all. It has a kind of a weird name.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't really think that it would be very good, to be honest.
Yeah, and I just don't know anything about the Marx Brothers. Like, at all. Never saw anything of theirs. Not everyone can see everything, right? But we got around to finding out what this movie's about. And this has a reputation of being one of the funniest comedies of all time.
Mm-hmm.
And I see why. I think it's very enjoyable for everyone. It's not super offensive in any way. And it's just super quick. Like, it doesn't stop with the jokes. So it's a fun time.
Yeah.
And it's so short that, I mean, why wouldn't you check it out?
Yeah, it's barely 70 minutes. I don't even think it is 70 minutes. It might be like 69 minutes. So it's a really quick watch. And it I feel like it does pack a lot into those 70 minutes. Like, it doesn't really, I think it uses its time well. You're never like, oh, I think that this is like too short, you know? I just feel like they utilized the time that they had correctly. But to kind of give you a plot overview, we have Rufus T. Firefly, who is played by Groucho Marx, who becomes the leader of a small nation called Fredonia. And it's kind of like him and this other leader of this other country are fighting over this woman named Mrs. Teasdale.
Mm-hmm.
And, hilarity, I guess, ensues.
Yeah, and there's two spies, which are both Marx Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
They're a big part of it. It is about a dictator, which apparently Mussolini didn't like when this movie came out. Thought it was directed at him.
I mean, maybe. Could be. It's got the big mustache and big eyebrows.
Right. I'm sure Mussolini being upset made the Marx Brothers very happy.
Yeah, I think that they did not,
They clearly don't take themselves seriously.
No.
And this is just from one movie. Again, I know nothing about him outside of this. I've heard of Groucho, and I heard of maybe Zippo, but maybe I'm just imagining it and it's different things. Because my knowledge of them is close to zero, but from this movie, you got, like, a lot from it. Like, you could understand the chemistry that they had. Mm-hmm. You could understand that Groucho's probably the leader. Probably the one that does the more talking in the interviews and stuff. For, I guess, the radio at the time.
Yeah.
And I also got that they would find it hilarious if Mussolini was offended directly by it.
Yeah, I think that they probably would not have... I think they would have taken it as more of a compliment, but I also have very little to go off of that, just, it's just how I feel. But I feel like this movie... I mean, it's credited... If you, look on, a Wikipedia or an IMDb or even Letterboxd, I'm pretty sure that this is considered a musical comedy.
Right, there's musical bits.
There's musical bits, but it's not as much as I would say, or I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a musical.
Right, yeah, I get that.
But I think that during that time specifically, I think a lot of things were musicals.
Right.
Like, if you look at the winners of the first few Oscars, for Best Picture, they're all pretty much musicals.
And a lot of them are regarded as, the worst Best Pictures of all time, so...
Yeah. So I think that just of the time that, you had to have some type of musical component to,
It ages it, though.
It does, yeah. Yeah.
Not that, musicals don't come out today, but it's different.
It's a different vibe.
But the music in this was funny.
Yeah, it is
Especially
funny.
the first big song.
Mm.
That was really funny. I mean, the whole movie's really funny. It felt fresh, too. It
It
felt
did.
like
It did.
a breath of fresh air. Where,
Yeah.
like, we didn't need to take it seriously.
Yeah, I definitely remembered thinking during the film as we were watching it that it's refreshing to see the humoristic side of people that were, adults in the
Right.
1930s, because I feel like people always think of like the older generations as being super serious,
Mm.
because like, I mean, the Marx Brothers, I think, were old men in like the 70s. And you kind of think of like people that died in the 70s as being like really grouchy and have no sense of humor and, are just, serious people. But then you look at these types of movies and it kind of brings light that, there's always like, there's always been comedy, there's always been humor.
Some of the humor is a little aged. Not that it's any less funny, but like you wouldn't perform it today.
Right.
Except for maybe Groucho. Like the way he talks could still be portrayed today and it would be funny.
Yeah. I think one of the humor elements that I think is aged is there's a scene where they're trying to get these plans, the spies are trying to get these plans from Groucho or Firefly in the movie. And they're dressed up like Firefly and they're trying to mimic what he's doing because they're trying to like say that he like looked in a mirror, and that scene goes on for a long time.
But I think that's the scene people think of for this movie, from what I read and from one people, because people nowadays, they're not going to be super familiar with every act from the 30s and 20s, so a lot of people were saying they didn't know anything about it and they didn't laugh because a lot of the comedy is aged for them. But they laughed at the mirror stuff. I don't know if that was fresh at the time. It's been replicated.
Yeah.
Plenty, so.
I just feel like that's the type of humor that I dislike the most about movies in general. Like if they use that type of humor, where it's like, oh, we're going to just pretend that, we're in a mirror and we're trying to mimic you and we're trying not to like set you off. To, get wise or whatever. And I've seen it in, I can't think of anything right now, but I have seen it in other like more recent movies, something similar to it, and I feel like it's just so boring to me. I just don't like that.
I thought it was funny.
I don't like it.
I think along the same lines of that, we have all the stuff that they do with the lemonade popcorn salesman, which they're just messing with him.
Yeah.
And that is a little aged, but it's funny, especially in context. It's funny, like with everything else that's happening. If you think that it's gonna be, ancient, and just you're not into that, then you're not gonna laugh, I guess, because it is a lot of that physical gags that you've seen a lot of. Everyone has. Cartoons have done it, and like just family shows and other movies, of course, and just. It can feel aged and just reused.
Yeah.
But I don't know, it felt fresh to me. The movie as a whole, maybe some of the gags, of course, are from the 30s. But the movie didn't feel ancient in itself. I actually had a lot of fun with it up until it starts the war.
Yeah, I agree.
Which is when I think it really slowed down. Not that I didn't laugh at parts they did during it. But it's just, I don't know, I really got into what they were doing in the house.
Yeah.
And in the courtrooms and stuff, and just moving it into the war scenario felt, I don't know, it's a change of pace I didn't necessarily welcome, but I still laughed at parts in it, so it's not like I can complain a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely agree that it kind of does. I mean, I feel like the pacing kind of comes to a steep decline, I guess, once you get to the war aspects, and I feel like it just becomes a little bit boring, and then it just ends, Like, there's no...
Yes, the ending is incredibly half-assed.
Yeah.
It is like oh, here he is, we got him, throw stuff at him, it's over, we won. And that's it. There's no real
ending.
Yeah, I mean, it's the ending, they won, but like the way they achieve the ending is just feels like they were running out of film.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like they really just didn't know how to end it. Like, I think they had a good concept and then they just didn't know what to do.
And I think that's part of why this wasn't critically acclaimed at the time. And it's not like it flopped, but it did worse than a lot of their other films. Mm. And also, like, I think one of the brothers didn't think the movie was very funny. Mm. And I see why. And if you're analyzing it, there's a lot of flaws. But that's most comedies in general. And this was there to tickle your funny bone and not to be a masterpiece. And I think people regarding it as a masterpiece of comedy might be too far.
I mean, it would be interesting to kind of see them, because we don't know much about the Marx Brothers, like their evolution into getting to this point. You know, maybe that has more significance than like just this being on its own.
Yeah, and I don't know like their effect, because these movies aren't really on streaming. Mm-hmm. Like, you have to rent them all. Like, there's no real place to watch any Marx Brothers for free. There's, like, DVD and Blu-ray box sets. Mm-hmm. Especially their Paramount films with Duck Soup. And I think they had 5 films with Paramount. But, yeah, I don't think it's super easy to learn about them organically nowadays.
Yeah, it's not... they're not as accessible.
You're not going to run across them by accident, I don't think. Again, this was recommended, and that's why, like, it even came on my radar. I'd never heard of it. People I found on Letterboxd, like, I found, like, 60 people, and, like, 10 of them have seen it.
That's pretty decent, I'd say.
Yeah, but I follow, like, people that watch a lot of movies, and people that watch deep cut stuff. And even then, there's not a lot that have seen it. Not that this is hidden or anything, right?
Yeah.
It's fairly known with some crowds, but I think nowadays people don't watch cable. They're not really organically coming across this type of film unless a streaming service pops it in front of them, or it's popular on a rating website like Letterboxd or IMDb. Mm-hmm. And I think this will just die a slow death, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It will be less and less known of by people because it's just, there's no way of organically seeing this the way that, like, Chaplin films from the same era are easier to come across.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard. It is kind of hard to judge the significance of this movie just because we don't have, like, the knowledge, which maybe we should, but I mean, I don't know. But there is something interesting that, you know, I did kind of look into this a little bit because, like, Fredonia sounds kind of like something that I've heard of before, like Fredonian or something like that. And just doing, like, a little bit of research, that it's a name given to, like, a fictitious country in general that popped up in the 19th century, but it was actually popularized by this movie.
Nice.
And so,
I mean, I'm sure this had impact, and like, the Marx Brothers in general had impact. But you look at other groups like Abbott and Costello, and they did the stuff with the Universal Monsters, and those are popular, so it's immediately, like, easier to come across Abbott and Costello via the Universal Monsters, and then you watch their other movies that have nothing to do with the monsters. And that way you come across them. And then Chaplin is regarded as the funny man, one of the funniest men of all time. Like the king of silent films, which he was. But then you have this group that might have had impact on things, but it's not direct anymore. And it might be a shame. I do want to watch their other movies, because this was so fast and so funny that why wouldn't I want to watch more stuff like it? But this came to us via someone that knew them. Yeah. And I just imagine that if it wasn't for that person, again, thank you for recommending it, we would never have seen this or any other Marx Brother films.
Yeah. 100%. I think that this one ended up getting, I think it is, like, in the American Film Institute's like top 100 comedy films. And then I think also the Library of Congress deemed it culturally or historically significant, so it's in the National Film Registry as well. So I think that, I don't know, maybe we're just like in the wrong crowd, because but I don't know. There's a lot of things that I think that get added to those types of lists that aren't necessarily
right,
like in the view of the public anymore.
Even popular ones, right? Like the most popular ranking lists are the Sight and Sound for like real cinephiles that really like that type of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Sight and Sound list is big, comes out every 10 years. But a lot of the movies towards the bottom, like not a lot of people have like logged online or made reviews of, or, you know, whatever. And then the biggest one would be the IMDb Top 250, where yeah, you have Shawshank Redemption and The Dark Knight that have like millions of people watching it. But then you'll have movies that are just the bare minimum numbers to qualify for this type of list.
Mm-hmm.
And just being on the list doesn't guarantee it gets attention.
Yeah.
But it gets a little bit more than if it wasn't.
Yeah.
It's help. It's a little bit of help. But it's still not always enough.
Yeah. Because
this is not going to be unhearded from a vault as a classic in the future.
I mean, I feel like I can, to give them, you know, some credit, I feel like I can see their style of humor being used by other filmmakers, because I think that they had this kind of dry humor.
Yeah, it's like a black comedy.
Yeah, so it's kind of like you say something and it's like a double entendre, and so they answer in like the other meaning.
He even uses his name as a double entendre.
Yeah.
Says Rufus.
Yeah.
All I can do is put a Rufus over your head.
Yeah.
Which, you know, not a great joke, but it's
a joke.
They're always like firing these fast, quirky little sentences.
Yeah.
Which I think is why it's still a lot more enjoyable now. If it was just physical comedy, it could be worse.
Yeah, and I think that I like this at least better than I enjoy, this might be controversial, than like Charlie Chaplin movies, just because I don't necessarily love physical comedy, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it is definitely like that you can't really fault it because it is of its time, you know? If you don't have any sound, you have to be physical.
Chaplin had sound.
Yeah,
at points. He decided not to use it.
But I'm just saying that, like, you know, if you're going to make a silent film, you kind of have to be more,
right, you
know, physical.
Yeah, that's what I thought from some of the brothers, especially the one with the curly hair.
Yeah. And oh yeah, that one, I don't remember which one he was, to be honest, but the one that stays silent throughout this film, I definitely could see his influence on like Lucy. You know, and I Love Lucy.
Mm-hmm.
I could see like her type of comedy being inspired by that Marx Brother, and then also Charlie Chaplin. So like, you know,
yeah,
it's just one of those things where like it might be so engraved in culture now that like we can't, like you said, we can't really differentiate.
Yeah, it's just so many people have done it, and like who's to tell if someone was inspired by someone that Lucille Bell inspired, and she was inspired by the original. But like it's so mudded now that it's hard to pinpoint the Marx Brothers. And I'm sure they did a lot for their medium. And they were popular in their time. And I hope there's a little revival. I definitely want to watch at least their other Paramount films, because those are easily available on Blu-ray and DVD.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll be grabbing that maybe Black Friday.
Yeah. But
this movie I really liked. I gave an 8 out of 10. There's a lot of flaws, but it was just so funny and entertaining. And it could be an all-time great, and I can see why a lot of people would think it's an all-time great. But I think it's also a little unfair to hold it as a masterpiece when I don't think they made it as a masterpiece. Like, I think when they made it, I don't think they came out as a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And they didn't put the effort or whatever to be a masterpiece. And I kind of get that from it. where this was just another one of their movies. Where if you like their style, you'll like this. But it's still just another one of their movies that maybe at the time would be hard to differentiate from the previous one or the next one. But now it's the one that lasted the test of time the best. Not quality-wise, I can't speak for that, but just popularity-wise.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like you bring up a good point of, like, it doesn't seem like they intended for this to be a masterpiece.
Right, just another one of their movies where they do their thing.
Yeah.
And it just came out funnier for people today than the rest.
Yeah. I gave this a 7 out of 10 because, like you said, I did enjoy this movie. I definitely didn't have a bad time. It wasn't like pulling teeth or anything. But I do feel like I see the flaws more than I see the enjoyment. And so some of those flaws like do make it kind of a little bit unenjoyable for me. So like, for example, once you get to the war part, which to be fair is only like the last 8 minutes maybe. It's very short.
It's short.
But that feels like it does kind of draw out.
It
and
does.
Then it kind of, I don't know, it loses me. So I feel like for the last 8 minutes of the movie, when the movie's only 70 minutes long-ish, it's kind of a lot.
See, but that's my problem, because I was so invested right up until then that, yeah, it brought me down a little, but I was still laughing, so I'm not gonna...
See, I think it brought me down more, and then there's just a few things like throughout the movie that I'm like, this isn't like necessarily for me, you know?
Right.
Like, just me personally, I'm not a big fan of certain comedy aspects of this. So that's just kind of a personal thing and not necessarily like on the movie, but it reflects in my...
I still thought it was pretty great.
In my rating.
Still think it's pretty great. And I can see why it's an all-time classic. And I recommend it to everyone listening if you haven't seen it. It's a little hard to come across if you don't want to pay like $4 or $5 to rent it. But, you know, if you have an old DVD you can dust up that maybe has this, or, you know, maybe it'll come
across
to streaming.
At a thrift store. You can come across it,
Sure.
maybe. Might be hard. Might be searching a long time.
Yeah.
But for sure, I think we both would agree that this is at least a movie worth seeing.
Yeah, I think you should see it. I don't think it's just worth seeing. I think you should see it. I think it's funny. I think if you're gonna watch like a B-rated Chaplin film, don't just watch this instead. But yeah, I don't think it's better than City Lights or Modern Times, but you kind of do, so definitely worth checking out. Might be more your pace. Very fast. Doesn't stop with the jokes. And yeah, I think that's all we have.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave us a comment, rate us if you can. And we will see you next time.